All right, so we are here to talk about the assignment workshop number 9, the Plushie animal model, and this is a lot like the mill wheel. So there's a tutorial, there's some goals you want to meet, things you can do to make it like more so to raise your grade. The tutorial is, again, like the mill wheel, an outline, but you can change things as you like. So for example, I'm making a plushie of like a little pig, but you can make kind of whatever quadruped animal you want. You can make your pig look different. You could turn this into a horse or a cat, frankly. You just need to change the shape to make it into the animal that you want. Now, what do I mean by a plushie? Well, so what I'm referring to by a plushie is that this is not meant to be animated, but this is a much like smoother, more organic shape than what we've done. So in modeling, we have rigid modeling, which is what we've been doing with the mill wheels and stuff. The stuff doesn't animate. And then you have organic modeling, which would be like people and animals and things that do deform. Now, if we look at this right here, make sure I didn't smooth it, there isn't there's no edge loops to like move the legs. This is not where these need to be if you're going to bend the legs. There's nothing here to bend the neck. It smooths out pretty decently to look like little chubby puffy pig, but it's not. You can't move this, right? You could put some maybe deformers on it to squash it a little bit if someone holds it, but this is not meant to be animated. So we're kind of bridging the gap from all of the very rigid modeling you've been doing to something you might do in 3D2, which is more organic modeling. So we're kind of taking a half step towards that. So I'm going to minimize this. So this tutorial, it looks a lot like the wheel ones, same types of pictures, same types of writing. I try to boldface some of the more important things to look at. There are a couple things I want to go over in here just to talk about as a concept. One of them is something that we haven't done since the hammer in week 2. And when we do it again now, you're probably going to go, oh, is that all that was? We start off with a box and we need to round it out. So we use an orthographic view, and remember, if we drag select across this corner, oh, I have symmetry turned on. Hang on. The PDF turns symmetry on later. If I drag across this corner, it selects this because these are all perfectly aligned, right? If I was to drag across the whole top, it would select all of them. So I can drag across all 4 corners, and then I can grab a scale tool and move things in to round it out in this direction. Now make sure you don't just use the middle thing here, because then this happens. Because it's scaling across all 3 dimensions whether you see it or not. So in this particular case, we need to make sure we are scaling only in that direction. Now, there is another part that has you rescaling from this angle. If you are only selecting one row of things, then you can use the overall scale tool because these are all in a line. So scaling it in one direction or the other, you can't, do you know what I mean? There's no scaling them apart from each other or too close together because they are already aligned in that particular order. So when you're in this view, if you select only one single row of something, you can scale across all 3 dimensions because this one dimension, you're not scaling it anyways. There is nothing to scale. And that is also a trick we use to later on when we're extruding things out for the legs, if we need to align things. So let's say, I'm making this up, this is not where these legs go, but let's say I go into face mode and I need to extrude out these faces. That's a terrible example. Let's see if I can find a better one in here. All right, we're going to go to a midway step so I can have something better to work with. Let's say I need to extrude out part of the foot. Now, I don't, because I can tell you these toes are already too long. So let's go from the back. Let's pretend we have to extrude these faces. Right now, if we try to extrude from something that's this directional, like it's already this angled. I mean, we can we use this tool. Symmetry is turned on, so it's going to affect both sides. But it's either going to work like that, or if we use the regular move tool. I've had interesting that this should come up. I've had this happen a couple times. You just have to undo until the extrude is undone. Extrude again and bring up the tool. Or I turn off symmetry. I turn it back on. It happened a couple times where I would extrude something and I would bring up a tool and it just wouldn't. Oh my goodness. Stand by. Okay, so after a bunch of investigating, I'm still not entirely sure what is causing that issue. It is an issue I had before. I know that delete history will fix it, but that's not a real solution, right? Because that should not be what you're doing. I do know another workaround. It's not ideal. So if you're trying to extrude something and it is being dumb like that, if you hit extrude and pull things out just a little bit, maybe that's not the manipulator you want. If you were to try and switch manipulators, that happens, right? Like the whole thing is affected. But when I would extrude something else, suddenly things would work again. And I don't know what would cause that. I'd mentioned in an earlier class that I wasn't entirely sure what was going on with symmetry. I hadn't tested it, I hadn't wrecked it enough. But that's definitely a thing. So I undid poly extrude. Back to the lesson at hand. So I'm going to, okay, use a scale trick. I select all these faces and I scale them in this direction. I have to move them, obviously. But by scaling them, oh, we don't want that one. But by scaling them in the direction of where they're going to be extruding later, I can flatten it out so that the extrude is easier. And I'm going to extrude this for funsies just to get that out of its system. So we're going to hit poly extrude and we're going to use that to extrude it. I'll just fix it later. We hit extrude. But now extruding this is easier because it's along one singular flat surface, and so I can do whatever I need to reshape this. And then if I want to put this back to where it was, right, I can select these edges. I think they were like this way. I can select this vertex, push it forward, right? Like there's things I can do to bring this back. And then all told, when I am done with that and I'm like wanting to get rid of this extra thing that I put in here, I just select it all and say edit mesh, delete edge vertex, and I'm back to square one. And theoretically, figures this breaks while I'm making this, I should be able to go back to this and extrude this out and be able to make whatever changes I want. So I'm not sure what got this caught up in that loop of not allowing me to edit a component. But the other thing I might try is switching this to object Z instead of world Z. So world Z is referring to the entire world and what direction that's in. And then object Z is referring to this object right here. So this is the world orientation. This is the object. In this case, they're both having the same orientation right now, but they are sometimes different. All right, so that's one issue I ran into, and that is one trick that I figured out. And I'm going to reset this file. Another symmetry glitch I would like to point out is, well, full disclosure, when I was first building this model, I mucked up the front leg like you would not believe. I mean, I had hidden faces. I had non-planar or non-manifold geometry on the inside here. I was bridging things. There was a lot of work I had to do to fix it, and that's not uncommon when you're working, especially if you're, recording yourself while you're working. But it was a solid 20 minutes of repair work on the mess that I made out of it, which may also be why I'm having glitches. Maybe there's still something in here I'm missing. But at any rate, I had to do a lot of bridging. And what I found is something like this would happen. Normally, I just select the whole opening for a bridge, and then I would click, and I gotta make sure that that's the only thing I'm selecting, but it selects it on the other side. And then when you hit bridge, this nonsense happens. It bridges it across the thing. Couple different solutions. One, turn off symmetry, bridge this side, and then bridge the other. That's if it's just a simple thing like this, that may be the best. Theoretically, with symmetry on, we should, JK, there we go, be able to bridge it like this, just across the two, and have it still connect to everything. Now, if you're bridging across just one face, that's one thing, but if you were trying to bridge across all of these, that would be different, because it would bridge, if we go into face mode here, oops, I need edges. Because this would happen. And it connects it. Does it even connect it to there? I'm not sure. Nope. It connects it like that. And so trying to go step by step is a little bit tricky. Maybe it'll work. When I was working on the toes, the way they were separated, it was not ideal. And then we just want to make sure things are like actually attaching properly. We can go into vertex face mode, make sure there's nothing weird going on. We can also hit 3 to fake smooth, make sure there's no weird crimping, because that's how I found the problem with the leg, is that I did a fake smooth and then there was all this weird folding in, and I went, oh, yeah, that's wrong. All right, so these are the kinds of issues we run into once we're doing stuff a little bit more complex, and again, using the symmetry can get a little bit glitchy. I don't like that the workaround is extrude one thing and then get rid of it later and then extrude another. That's not ideal. The good news is sometimes you can find something to extrude that needs to be extruded. So if you're working on, this is not the finished nose at all, but if you're working on this and it needs to be extruded, this manipulator does work fine for that. So you could do that and then later on use, the regular manipulator. But if you get stuck in any kind of loop like that, let me know as soon as possible. Also remember to go into your Windows settings, preferences, and make sure that undo is turned to infinite. I used that, gotta tell you. But yeah, those were the general issues I ran into. Also, you can see this is a partially done one. I ended up, this is how I made it when I made the tutorial, and this is how long the legs were and how long the toes were. I redid all of that by the end. I went through, symmetry still on? Okay. I went through and was going into here into this vertex mode, and I was like selecting the toes like this and then selecting them like this, and I was just all over the place reshaping everything. I was so unhappy with how like elongated everything was. I was kind of annoyed with myself for not noticing it sooner. Um, but that does happen where you get partially through something and you're like, oh wait, that's not what I wanted. I make sure his legs are the same length. And so I just went in real quick like that. Whoops, wrong button. And there we go. Reshaped it that way to make him a little bit chunkier, a little bit, rounder. And then that was the easy part. The hard part to round him out, especially underneath, was to go in and use a variety of tools, frankly. I was I was moving edges in a lot of cases. That works out really well for rounding things out because it kind of, you can take a whole section. There we go. You can go by vertex if you need to. There's no perfect instruction manual for that. I can't tell you, oh yeah, do this, it'll work, because that's not how it goes. And if you're doing a different animal, then you would need, which arrow do I need? You would probably need a different set of information anyways, right? You'd be, maybe you're doing a horse, and so you want, well, it's a Plushie horse, but still, maybe you need things to be a little bit skinnier than what I'm working on. Yeah, some kind of, this works out differently than moving vertex by vertex. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. Whichever one you use is just that, you just have to get used to it, and you just pick the thing that you want to change. Remember that moving an edge moves 2 vertexes and changes all of these faces. I'm changing 6 faces and 2 vertexes by moving 1 edge. If I move 1 vertex, I change 4 edges and 4 faces, right? All 4 of these edges, all 4 of those faces change. If I change a face, it changes 4 vertexes at like 12 edges or 8 edges, and this plus a tic-tac-toe board of faces changes. So everyone's going to have their own methodology for working. I tend to jump back and forth between components depending on what I need to happen. Some people will only work in vertex mode, right? So it's just, that's to each their own. And the things we learned this week include, well, I'm going a little bit long on this, I apologize, including the cleanup tool. So you can use this to, in my case, I was always looking for nope, I lied, non-planar faces. That's what I was always looking for, because that's where I always have the most trouble, right? So I would need definitely more edge loops around the legs to get that to work. All right. But in terms of making this work, you want to, this is my partway done version, use whatever animal you want. I say it in the assignment. You can use, if you want to follow this exactly, that's fine. Other ways that you can, raise your grade are to add more details. More details includes a lot of different options. It includes, oh, let me get the final version. All right, so my quote unquote finished version, which is more just where I stopped. So more details can mean a lot of things. Let's say you want to follow the tutorial pretty closely. You're not comfortable with changing this, to a, I don't know, rhinoceros or something. But you still wanna do a bit more. More details can mean a few things. You could try adding like a mouth or other details like more musculature, more defined shapes and things like that. Or you can add more details in the form of maybe beveling some edges that I didn't in mine. So there we go, we can bevel edges on the nose so that it holds its place a little bit better, right? I must have gotten rid of it, but there was a time when I was actually going through here and beveling some edges to give it a little bit more definition when it got smoothed, right? So more details can mean more modeling detail, like hold the shape kinds of stuff, or it can mean more details in terms of like things on here. It can certainly mean more definition around the legs. This is not great. I like the symmetry that I have. Let's see, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In the face, so I wouldn't, where I add the insert edge loop tool, I have to remember if it goes here, it's going along the face. And if I want it to go around the leg, that's not a good place to put that. I would need to manually cut across because this is not an edge loop, right? There's a 5-point star right there. So those are the kinds of things you could do. Or you could, because it's plushie, you could add like little details like there's a collar because oh, it's your pet plushie, or there's a tag on the back. Like there's things you can add. Um, Price tag, right? There's details like that that you can add. Rather than making it a different animal, which is also a thing you can do. If you want to make this a completely different animal and just follow the outline, like the tutorials and outline, that is perfectly fine. Do end of day next Wednesday, worth the same amount of points as a lot of other models, and the PDF is right there.